Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Mike here at Game from Scratch with some uncharacteristically late news. Sorry about that, this actually happened yesterday, but Blender 2.93 LTS was released. If you do not know, LTS stands for long-term support. They're going to continue to do patches and bug fixes for this release of Blender for the next 2 years. So if you're looking to start a large game or movie project and you want stability, the LTS version is where it's at. Obviously, if you've never heard of Blender before, well, welcome to planet Earth. This is an open source graphics application. It is available at blender.org, and yeah, it's free download for every platform that matters. And today we are going to be talking about the 2.93 release. This is the end of the 2.x series. The next version we are going to have is 3. Something, and that, you know what, it's not a huge difference. There's not a lot of new stuff in 3 versus 2, but it is definitely a bookend to the era, and we're going to look at some of the new features of Blender 2.93, and then we're going to go through the release notes, which I have to say right up front, they have really upped their game. Their release notes are a thing of beauty now. But first, into Blender itself. And the one major new change in Blender in the most recent versions is the move to a nodes for everything approach. And they started that off with geometry nodes. And until now, they haven't had really great examples to showcase what geometry nodes can do. This one will go a lot further to showcase that. This is one of the demos you can get. I'll show you where you can grab this for yourself. That shows what you could do with a geometry node, and this is procedurally generated building. So think about if you were populating a game world or level, you can create stuff like this. And where the procedural comes in, well, over here you can see width, height, top floors, and so on. So what we can do is change the number. So there's the top floors on the building. We're modifying this middle one right here. We can change how high the building is. We can change how low the building is, and so on. We can change the width of it. And the cool thing here is everything kind of adapts on the fly. So all of a sudden you can see this procedural geometry node-based approach, how you could definitely use this in level creation tools, in creating tools that can be reused, where your technical director could create these procedural setups, and then your artists can actually just start placing without having to get into the intricacies. You basically have all of the details you need down here for feeding it. Now the question is, how does this magic work? And I say that this magic works by, well, mostly magic. So we're going to see, this is the node structure. Let me just, yeah, we'll get rid of the text window. You don't need to see that. Come on, up and in. All right, here is the geometry node, and this breaks down into a number of different nodes. You're going to see here we have a ton of outputs going on. All the various different things go together into various different node networks. So these ones, you can drill into them. And we've got all these things work together to generate output node, which is this guy right here. And you're going to see here our buildings. We have a series of buildings being populated via these geometry nodes. So the geometry nodes are just basically a node-based procedural network that the end result is some geometry for your level. And you see here, you can actually, there are a fair number of nodes available right now. And more are being added over time. You're going to find in the 2.93 release, there were a ton of new nodes added in. So that is the one major new feature, is they're really moving towards the Houdini way of doing things, and nodes are going to become more prolific in the entirety of Blender, but geometry nodes is where they started. And this example is a great example, kind of showcasing just what geometry nodes are capable of, and I hope it kind of gives you an insight into where the world could go from here, especially because you'll be able to download someone else's blend files, configure with geometry nodes, and you could tweak it to be almost anything you want. This is going to bring a ton of power into the Blender ecosystem. The other one, this is something I have wanted for ever. And the closest way you could do this before was the wireframe drawing. You could basically create a wireframe of a mesh, scale it up slightly, apply a modifier to it, and get the results. But now we've got the ability to do line art using grease pencil. And here is the final rendering. And I love this feature. This is something I have wanted in Blender for ages. It is really slow though. So here you can see we've got a number of line art modifiers, and there's a ton of control over each one. You can say, all right, this greased pencil image is going to trace over the underlying geometry. It's going to mark contours, material edges, and so on and so forth. So you can set up how things work. If you've worked with the non-photo, the NPR rendering stuff, the inking stuff, it's very similar, but this is an actual modifier. So you see here, I can turn these off, and it takes forever. This is a very slow example, but you're going to see here these multiple line art modifiers, as soon as it comes back to me now, are working on an underlying real-time 3D object. So there we got one of them turned off. We've got a total of 4 modifiers going on here. I'm going to slowly turn them all off, and then you're going to see what these line arts are actually. So there you can see another step in the process. Let's turn that one off, and then we'll turn the opacity one off. And give it a second. Oh, and I got to switch out of viewport rendering over here. So there is what we started with. This is the original object. And then those line art modifiers are obviously kind of tracing an outline of it. So if you need to do blueprint style sketches and so on, this new grease pencil modifier, that's how it's implemented. It is a modifier for a grease pencil object. So you can see it right here. It is line art. Right there. So it enables you to do these really cool tracing so you can get that blueprint-ish look. And obviously, as you saw, it works directly in Eevee, or you can render it out as well. It's slow. It's really, really slow, at least in this example. And I'll show you where you can get this example as well. But it's definitely one of those features I've wanted in Blender for a very long time. So those are the 2 highlight features here. I think geometry as nodes is definitely the biggest one, but by no means is that it. So now we're going to go back to the beautiful, beautiful release notes. And you're going to find exactly what I'm talking about. So Blender 2.93, they did a show reel of their new features. So you can see the geometry nodes in action. There are a number of 22 new geometry nodes have been added in. I'm not going to go through them all because I do not want this video to be that long. But you can see some of them in action down here. Attribute proximity, texture sampling, and volume to mesh. Those have all been added in, as well as like a whole bunch of other ones. You also have raw primitives that you can drop in now. So if you're creating compound objects, you could create things out of circles, cones, cubes, cylinders, grids, isospheres, UV spheres, and lines. Oddly enough, no monkey. That's kind of sad. Then we go a number of other nodes in as well, so you can see them all in action in creating procedural buildings, and you get an idea of where geometry nodes come from. And there's a heck of a lot of hidden power here, and this is a great example, better than the previous examples they had. It really showcases the strength of geometry nodes going forward. We've got some improvements to the user interface, including searching attributes, which is nice. It's important to know when and why that happens. You can now see a notification icon on the nodes that cannot be processed properly. Oh, so if you have a broken node, you're now getting an indication. Spreadsheet editor is here to help you inspect your mesh instance or even point clouds, so you can go through the really, really raw data there using the spreadsheet view. Learning materials, some download files, and more details on geometry nodes. So geometry nodes is definitely the biggie. Now, every version of Blender since Blender 2.8-ish has been getting huge amount of sculpting updates, and this one is no different. We now have mask loops and patterns, mask textures, and flexible face sets. Now again, I really love these release notes because it's really kind of showcasing what the thing does without requiring a whole lot of explanation. They've really upped their game here. What you're seeing is sculpting is kind of getting more and more modeling and other tools kind of built into it. So in some ways, I think sculpting in Blender could eventually be like an all-in-one 3D coat / ZBrush-like experiencing. So you can mask out of the box. Gone are the days of drawing masks from scratch. You can now create masks automatically by loose parts or face sets. We got here the line art that we saw in action. This is a modifier for grease pencils and definitely can do some cool results. The Interpolate operator is now a fully fledged tool rewritten from scratch for a more flexible workflow. So now supports multi-frame editing to work faster than ever before. So if you're doing animations using Grease Pencil, you're going to love that. And you can import SVG files as Grease Pencil objects, export Grease Pencil objects as vectors for use in Inkscape and other popular vector-based applications, and PDF export as well. That's awesome. So if you are working with Inkscape or Adobe Illustrator or Affinity Designer, you can actually take your Inkscape out as vector graphics so you can continue to edit them in your 2D tool of choice. And even cooler, you can now import them in as an SVG file and start working on them as Grease Pencil objects. So it gives you that two-way support, and some of these tools like Affinity Designer and Adobe Illustrator have been around for ages, as has Inkscape. And if you've learned your workflow there, doing vector-based graphics work inside of Blender is going to be much more pleasant because you can use your tool of choice and integrate it into the pipeline. And a number of other smaller features to Grease Pencil as well. Eevee is getting more improvements as well. Faster volumetrics, more stable, support soft shadows and area lights. EV influencers control how much diffuse, specular, and volume components will contribute to the lighting. New depth of field, and again, they do a great job of illustrating, and you can really see it in the here, in the depth of field control between the two versions. You can also see it in the window in the background. So there is the result of depth of field. I guess you're really seeing it on the pot in the foreground too. You got volume and shadow changes. So volume shaders in EV now support area lights and soft shadows. And as you can see, a pretty profound difference between the two as a result. And then a number of other smaller improvements. We got some performance improvements with persistence data, which I think is sort of like a caching for speeding up rendering. We have the new Intel Open Image Denoise upgraded to version 1.3. You really will notice this one up here in the blanket. It's a really subtle approach, and down here you can't really see it that much, but you're going to see noise in the render, especially if you look right there. See some blotchiness and such. So once there, very, very subtle, but that's what the denoising does for you. And more cycles improvements. And again, 2.93 is a long-term support, so it's going to get 2 years of support. That's bug fixes and security patches and so on. And then there are a number of other smaller changes there as well. If you want to get into the full list, which I will have in the linked article down below, you can dig into everything we were talking about there. As I mentioned earlier on, all of the assets I used are available. So these are available at blender.org/download/demo files. I'll of course link that as well. So if you scroll on down to the bottom, you're going to find we have a couple of great demonstrations for geometry nodes available now. This one for game developers has definitely probably got your eyes peaked up a little bit, using them to create hexagonal tiles. This was one of the original demos, but it's really been beefed up in terms of what it is capable of. That is the new one we just looked at right there, but you can see a number of different uses. This is the original demo they had for just scattering pebbles around a scene. You can see how far we have come since that single demo. And there's a number of other examples here for showcasing all various different aspects of Blender in action as well. If you're interested in particularly checking out the image tracing one, I think it's back. All right, I gotta go find myself. It was available as a link. It's a direct download link. So if you go here, the download file for that one is available right there. And you want to learn some more, the manuals, all the documentation, etc., have been updated as well. So that is Blender 2.93, the last of the 2.9s, and I gotta say, it is one heck of a send-off. And then we're going to have Blender 3.x in the near future, and that everything as nodes is definitely going to get more and more interesting. Again, the two things that really jumped out to me that I really like, I like that line art because I've tried to replicate that in the past using a clone and wireframe, and it never looked that great. This will do a great job of it. So if you're trying to do stylistic renders of your scene, or you're trying to create a blueprint from an existing 3D object, it could be a beautiful tool for you. And then, of course, geometry nodes. That's the star of the show, and I gotta say, this could really be a game changer in the way that people get their work done. I'm just blown away by it, to be honest. That's geometry nodes in Blender 2.93 LTS stable version for the next 2 years. And if it's a version, it's the version you want to stick with for the next couple years, well, it's a good one to be stuck on because there's some great new stuff in there. Let me know what you think of it and Blender in general. Comments down below, and I will talk to you all later. And once again, apologies for being 1 day late. I'm slacking. Sorry about that.